Hey everybody, we've already learnt the steps involved in how new species evolve, and we use the acronym INRS, I-N-R-S, and INRS stood for isolation, then natural selection, then a reproductive barrier forming, and then speciation, which is basically the name for the whole process, where a new species has evolved. So we're going to look in more detail about each of these steps now, with an example here of this crab population. So this population here, they're called the red swimmer crab. Well, that's the name of the species anyway. So the first step in a new species evolving is isolation. We already know that. And I used the example last time of a river flowing and flooding between different groups of the population, and that splits the population in half. So that's fine. Rivers can flood and cut off parts of the population. Lakes can also dry out. So for aquatic species, if the lake starts to dry out, then there will be smaller lakes that end up forming, and different groups of the population will be split up. So the population fragments, or it splits into isolated little portions. There's also other examples that don't involve geography and that can actually just involve the behavior of the species. So there can be things like if some individuals start eating different foods, that can be enough to start isolating the members of the population. Because maybe they'll be awake at different times, maybe they'll go to different areas, or they won't interact with other members who eat different foods from them. We can also have things like sea level rise. That's going to be a really important one in the next 50 years as sea levels rise because of climate change. That's going to cut off sections of land. Islands might be split into two. So lots of species will be isolated into separate populations. Another one based on behavior would be choosing certain mates. So one group of individuals might choose a particular characteristic in their mate compared to other individuals. And that might be enough to split the population into half, or isolate separate members. Okay, so here, one of these causes here has managed to split this red crab population. Could be a physical barrier, could be behavioural. And now that these populations are split, natural selection will take place. So over time, each population is going to be evolving separate traits and adapting to their environment. So each of those isolated populations evolves and adapts separately. All right. And so in our example of swimmer crabs here, this population down the bottom, they've started to evolve in terms of their colour. They've gained purple colouring on their exoskeleton, and they started to grow a little bit bigger too when they reach adulthood. So the orange swimmer crab population, they've still stayed pretty much the same, and that can happen. Both populations don't have to change. But if enough time passes now, there'll be some kind of barrier that's stopping these two different types of crabs from breeding. So even if we brought together a purple swimmer crab and an orange one, some kind of barrier is stopping them from breeding. It might be they won't breed because of their colours. Maybe they don't recognise each other as the same species. Maybe they physically can't breed anymore because the structure of their reproductive organs might have changed. So there's lots of different types of reproductive barriers, but the overall effect is that the two populations can't breed anymore. Even if we brought them together again. Okay, so that means we've reached the final step. If the two populations can't breed anymore, they've become new species. So that's what speciation is. So we have a new species. So species 1 is still the red swimmer crab. They haven't actually changed. Sometimes we can have two brand new species, but often we have a parent species that stays the same, and then we have another one that evolves to form a new species. And we can call this one the purple swimmer crab. Okay, so that's the main steps in how evolution and natural selection causes new species to evolve over time. And this process is constantly happening as populations get cut off and start evolving separately.